Building lives, acquiring cultural knowledge.
In public schools in America, there is a persistent belief that African American males are not as intelligent as other students. These students are often punished more harshly than other students for the same behaviors. When students see themselves over an extended period of time as less intelligent, they eventually will start to believe it. They will internalize those negative feelings about themselves and may become isolated from society. Eventually, this can lead to higher levels of incarceration for African American males.
The achievement gap is a word we hear a lot at school. This means that African Americans aren't achieving at the same level as white students. Some ways the achievement gap is measured are test scores, suspensions, and grades in school. Minnesota's achievement gap is one of the largest in the nation, and Minneapolis School District has one of the largest achievement gaps in the state. But what are some of the reasons for African American students to be less successful in school? The answer is complicated.
This was not meant for us to be scholars. This system of education was not meant for us to be intelligent folks. This system was set up for us to be and maintained as slaves. I think that this country was set up not for African Americans to achieve academically.
So when we look at graduation rates, we look at GPA, we look at attendance, right? We look at test scores. Our black male students are either at the very bottom or next to the bottom when we look at those academic success indicators. And then when we flip it around and look at behavior, referrals, suspensions, possible expulsion or admin transfers, our black males are number one.
In 2013, Minneapolis Public Schools suspended or expelled 4,896 students. 3,801 were African American students and 328 were white students. African Americans are nearly 7 times as likely as white students to be pulled from school. Often, schools will punish black students more harshly for the same behaviors as white students. As this keeps happening over the years, it influences the way African American students see their futures, making them more likely to end up in prison because they see themselves and society sees them as criminals. The school-to-prison pipeline is about how the education system is targeting black youth.
African Americans are 3.5 times more likely than their white classmates to be suspended or expelled.
African American male students make up 32% of youth in juvenile detention centers.
1 in 4 black students with disabilities were suspended at least once versus 1 in 11 white students.
Neglect is only scratches the surface of the underlying reasons why this type of this demographic is so affected by incarceration. The overall perspective or societal perspective of young black males as being criminal will contribute to this massive number of black males in the prison systems in the United States.
I think that feeling neglected is but one reason that they end up in prison. Again, that this prison system, this pipeline that we talk about, has become what Michelle Alexander wrote in a book called The New Jim Crow. So after slavery, the way that southern states figured to keep blacks in check was to implement Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws were set up to say, hey, we won't let them vote, we won't let them be employed, they can't make the same money. I mean, all of these things that were set up were a way to really kind of restrict African American growth. Right? The new Jim Crow has been, what we can do is incarcerate. So I think there are multiple avenues and reasons that African American males end up at such a high rate in that system. But education, housing, employment are also aspects that we would have to look at, not just neglect.
The achievement gap and school-to-prison pipeline are 2 big contributing factors to prevent the success of African American students. How is the Minneapolis Public Schools addressing these problems? Last year, the Minneapolis Public Schools created an Office of Black Male Achievement to try and focus more specifically on finding solutions to the achievement gap with our African American students. Michael Walker is the leader of this new school district office.
Office of Black Male Student Achievement was started basically because of the academic success indicators that we have in our system and how our black males are performing with those. And so that's why the office was created, to change those outcomes.
The Black Class is a new pilot program that started this year in Minneapolis Public Schools to address these issues of the achievement gap in the school-to-prison pipeline. This year, the class is offered at North, South, and Edison high schools and a few middle schools around the district. It is focused mainly on the experience of being an African American male and is taught by prominent community experts in the African American community.
And so the Building Lives Acquiring Cultural Knowledge piece is about showing our students a different foundation that they have. And so once you know who you are, where you come from, some of your history, and when I say history, I mean your rich history, not just a history that has been taught to us in our school system around slavery, but we have a history much longer and richer than that 300 or so years that we experienced slavery, and we need to share that history. And so that's kind of what the class is based around. It's definitely from the black male perspective, so we look at our students as the center, and then we look into the future as well as going back into the past.
I know that Minneapolis has been recently bringing in some initiatives that would increase the diversity, hence the fact that I'm here.
I mean, this is the first time that I've actually ever had an African American male teacher ever throughout all my 12 years. This is the first time that I've actually had an African American teacher at all. And I feel like this class definitely brings us closer as a community within South High of all the black males. And I feel like throughout the district, it definitely builds a relationship with us.
In the class, we talk about real stuff and like manhood. And in that class, he talks to us and explains to us how to be like a man and stuff when we get older, so we don't have struggles. They actually understand what we go through, so they care about us more.
New classes like Black and African American Studies are helping address the needs of African American students, but many educators and students feel one important factor is still missing: diversity among the teaching staff.
When Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, the Supreme Court said you can't have segregated schools, you have to integrate. Before that, there were many African American schools with African American teachers doing actually a pretty good job of educating African Americans. But when that system changed, what the American government and school systems did was throw away those African American teachers and then integrate students of color into white schools. You will still see that the majority of the teachers don't look like the African American students.
But if we had like a black teacher that actually cared and like understood where we could from, like I feel like most of the black male students actually graduate and have fun in school. Like they just here to teach us, they're not really helping us. Like certain teachers really want to help us and make sure we graduate, but half of them don't get inspired to like help the students, or the students don't really come to them to actually need help.
Well, obviously African American males gonna care about African American students. All of us got the same, basically all of us got the same struggle, to be honest. But I think black teachers care about black students' education more than white teachers' education.
This is a district where the largest majority, the largest demographic are students of color, black and brown students. And therefore, the teaching force needs to mimic the student.
So when you ask the question of should there be more diversity, I mean, it makes me chuckle, I giggle on that as much diversity as we can achieve is what we need.
I feel like it's a tremendous blessing to be able to be the teacher that I never saw in my classrooms.